Hey everybody. So we had a big long three-part project the last couple weeks. So today I figured we'd make just something simple but that explores a couple different stitching techniques that we haven't really gotten into because honestly I don't do them too much. But once you learn how to do them, they kind of unlock a whole plethora of different projects three-dimensionally that you can make. And we're going to explore the butt joint and the box joint today by making just a simple cylindrical pen holder. So I have some scrap from the bag that we used last week, and this is going to be really good to practice butt joints and box joints if you've never done them, because you want something that's a little bit thicker. You can do these joints on thin leathers with some practice, but what we're going to be doing is we're not going to be going through this way. We're going to be going through at an angle on some of these, and if you use like a 5-6 ounce leather, it's going to give you plenty of room to get your awl through. So I'm using, I have my calipers set. We're going to make a cylinder. I'm using, this is set to 1.5 inches, which will give us a 3-inch circle. That's going to be our base. So I'm just going to trace out on the flesh side, not the grain side, a 3-inch circle, and we'll cut this out. And you want to be careful that you can dull these down. Since this is just practice, I'm just using the ones that I always use. But you don't want to push all the way through so you have a hole in the back. Just be light with it. Or use a 3-inch template. You can print out on your computer, and then I'm going to cut this out first. So I have a 4-inch strip of leather for my walls. I want it to be 4 inches tall. And all I did was, because I don't have a pattern or anything, I just kind of wrapped it around the cylinder, or the circle that I cut to form the cylinder, and marked where I want it to end. And you can see that's going to match perfectly. Now, you can join this seam in many ways. You can do like a baseball stitch, you can do like loop it around. But what we want to do is a butt joint. And what a butt joint is it's going to look pretty much just like any other saddle stitch on both sides. We want to do that first before we attach it to the base. But we have to punch everything on this piece and on this piece before we start assembling everything. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to finish the edges, because once this is together, you can burnish a little bit, but it's much easier to do everything first. So on my top, since I'm not going to have any stitching at all, which of course you could just do a stitch just for aesthetics, I'm going to bevel both sides so that it'll be nice and rounded. And I'm also going to do that on the bottom. So I'm going to burnish all 4 sides. I'm not going to bevel the 2 sides where I'm going to do my butt joint, but I am going to burnish them just so that when I put them together it looks a little bit neater. Even though we're going to be punching holes through these sides, it just keeps it nice and tidy. So I have these burnished. I'm just using gum trag and my canvas like I always do, and I'm going to burnish the top now. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to burnish the circular base as well. And I'm going to treat that similar to the butt joints on this piece, so these sides. I'm not going to bevel anything, I'm just going to burnish it. And you can do a little bit of sandpaper if your circular cut isn't perfect. So now it's time to lay out our stitches. I have my other dividers set with my normal, let's see if I can get a measurement for you, because a lot of people always ask. I am going about 3 millimeters from the edge on this. And I'm going to go around my bottom, and then on the sort of body piece we're only going to do 3 sides. And with circles, they're not hard, just take your time and kind of rotate. I like to rotate the piece, and that'll get us a nice line. Pick your top, doesn't matter which. I'm going to go with, this is the top. So I'm going to start here. I'm not going to go all the way to the top here. I'm going to go a little bit below it. Then I'm going to do my whole bottom. And then I'm going to do the other side, and the same, I'm going to stop a little bit above the top there. So there are a couple different types of awls. If you're used to using pricking irons, then you're probably only using a scratch awl. Now this is a round pointed awl, and it's only really meant for tracing out patterns. The other type of awl is a diamond awl, and this is for French style leatherwork mostly. Hermes uses it. This one's very old and really messed up, but I've been using it for gosh, 15 years when I do this type of work, and it's never let me down. So with this sort of awl, you have more, it's not the same profile, but you have a diamond profile similar to a diamond stitching chisel. And you strope it just like you would a skiving knife, but you do it on all 4 sides. This one's already fairly stroked. This is just some stropping compound on some veg tan. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to start first with our butt joint. So the butt joint is going to be the joint that puts both of these together like this. So we don't want to see any stitches on the inside, and we don't want to do any looping around. Now most people are used to punching all the way through with the stitching irons. We're actually, and this is how it's done in French leatherwork sometimes too, we're only going to use these to mark our stitches, and you can use an overstitch wheel for this too if you have one. So what I'm going to do is, to make sure that our stitches line up, I'm going to hang my first prong over the end of the top of my piece, and then I'm going to use that as the spacing, and I'm just using hand pressure to make little marks. I'm not going really deep into the leather. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Now for a butt joint, all of the stitches on both sides, we're going to come in with our diamond awl, and we're going to punch our holes at a 45-degree angle. But for a box joint, we need one piece at a 45-degree, punched at a 45. The other piece can be punched all the way through like normal. So for this piece, because we have to get all the stitches punched out before we start assembling, I'm going to go down now, and I'm just going to punch through like this is a wallet or a bag or anything. Just boom, 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 straight through at a 90-degree angle to the edge of the leather. Now for our circular piece, we're going to mark our stitches out just like we did on the sides of our body piece for our butt joint. This is going to be the box joint. I'm using my 2-prong stitching iron because it's a full curve, and that will allow us to mark even stitches around the whole curve. And I'm also using the same spacing for both my body piece and my base piece. Now what you can do is you can use a larger spacing for your body piece and a smaller spacing for this base piece, because we're going to end up, and I'll show you how to do it, you're going to end up having to skip stitches to keep up with the stitching because you just naturally have a longer piece around the outside. But I'm just going to show you how to skip the stitches because it is a little bit of work to match up the right 2 sets of stitching irons to do it the other way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around, take my time, and I'm just putting 1 prong in the existing hole, and the second prong I'm making my new mark, and that will ensure that every single hole is evenly spaced. So now comes the part where we have to punch our 45s, and it kind of feels daunting, but it's actually pretty, I find it pretty relaxing and pretty fun. You just want to make sure that you have a nice polished awl blade, and you want to hold it at the right angle. So let me get, here we go. Here's some scrap, and here is a little line of stitches. All right. So our goal is to punch from here through the flesh of our leather here. Now, you want to make sure that you're holding your awl straight. And as you can see, if you hold the awl straight, you get a nice little hole that goes all the way through. If you're holding your awl at an angle, what will happen is you'll cut basically, because these are very sharp, you'll cut basically a little line sideways like this, and when you stitch, this will come up, and it won't look very good, and it can rip over time. So we want to make sure that we're holding it as best we can, and that we're not too far away from the edge. Now we can tap this down with a hammer after we're all stitched up and flatten that all nice, totally good, and all of our holes are coming through the edge here. But I would suggest, if you've never done this before, grab some scrap and just practice it. It's not very hard. And once you kind of unlock this and have this in your bag of tricks, You can make so much cool stuff with it. So I like to do these punches into a cutting mat because I find that if I do them off the edge like this, I tend to, and this is a personal thing, but I tend to push my awl too far. So when I do them into a cutting mat, what happens is I know that once I hit the cutting mat, my stitch is good. And I'm just going to work my way down, and you can see how with practice you get the perfect angle to hold your awl at, so that you can get every single one at the right angle, or at the same angle. And you can also see how I'm not going in at an angle, I'm going in straight, so that we're not getting, you know, we're a little bumpy, but we're not getting any of those cuts or anything like that because we're not at an angle. And then this last one has a hole that goes through for our bottom, but I'm also going to punch one at a side. Now we just flip it over and we do our other side. So now that we have all of our holes punched, I just have a needle here, and you can see the path that the stitch is going to take. It's going to come right in the middle of the flesh, which is okay because the grain is our real strength here. So this is basically just like if you had a 2-ounce leather, you're getting that same strength. And you can see, because we use that cutting board as our stopping point, we pretty much have the same exit point right in the middle on every single one of our holes. And that is a thing that takes practice. So I would encourage you, if you want to learn this stitch, to just get a bunch of scrap. You know that's my favorite way to tell you guys how to practice. Get a bunch of scrap and just practice this over and over and over again until you have the muscle memory where you know exactly how to hold the awl. And it doesn't take much time at all. It's not a super hard thing to learn. But you can see that all of our stitches are now coming out directly in the middle of this seam, and they'll come out in the middle of the other seam too. So when we stitch them together, you're never going to see any thread on the inside of our pencil cup. And it also helps if you're just learning to use a hot stuff leather, because there are lots of oils in this leather that are going to help your blade glide through nice and smoothly, whereas some veg tans are a little dry, and the last thing you want while you're learning how to do this is to be struggling pushing this all through. So with the circle, what I like to do is I make sure I get my grip right, and I like to I use kind of a long awl on a box joint. This is not punching through on a stitching pony, just on a box joint like this. I like a long awl that I can rest in the palm of my hand so that my fingers are only doing sort of the directing and my arm is doing the pushing. You shouldn't have to push hard, you want your blade to be nice and smooth and sharp. With a circular one, I'm going to basically do what I did with the last one. I'm going to punch through like that. Then I'm going to rotate my piece a little bit so that I'm always punching directly through. Every single hole, I'm going to rotate the piece. And it helps to use a cutting board with marks in it because I know, so this is my little line that I'm lining up with. Every hole, I'm just rotating to line up with that line. First thing we're going to do is we're going to sew up the butt joint on the body of the cup. What I like to do is I take a little bit of painter's tape and I put it on one side, and then I fold this over, and I actually think I learned this from a YouTube video a few years ago. I forget who made it, but thank you for that video. And we're going to put this on the other side like so. And then, depending on the leather, you can fold it over. If it's going to tear up the leather, if you're using like a sort of a delicate leather, you want to be careful. But then I'll usually rip this, put this kind of right there and right there. And it looks weird, but it does the trick just enough. You can see when this is bent in that all of our holes line up and it's just kind of an extra pair of hands. I'm going to use some white Ritza tiger thread just so we can see it on camera. Of course, if you wanted to do a matching brown, whatever, go for it. So I'm going to start my first hole. I'm going to kind of wiggle through to my first hole on the other side, get that up through. Start my second hole, Get that up through and pull my needles so that they're even. And then it's just like any other saddle stitch, just like a little bit sideways. And after every stitch, we're going to pull tight to get that seam nice and tight. So for a backstitch, it's nothing fancy. It's really just exactly like a normal backstitch. I've gone back 2. I'm just going to go back 1 more on each side, making sure that the stitches stack. And you might have to wiggle a little bit, but it's pretty easy to get through. And then we're just going to clip these like we normally do, fairly short. On a joint like this, I like to do them on either side so they're kind of they're even and they balance out. On wallets and stuff, when you can hide it, I'll usually do it on a single side, but then we'll just do a little melt. And there we go. So now that we have this done, we can remove our tape from the inside, and we have our finished butt joint. Now what I like to do with these, this is called a cobbler's anvil. And it's great because you can slide forms like this over it. And then I'm gonna take my 1/4 pounder, or you can use a crate hammer or whatever stitching hammer that you have. And I'm just gonna tap this seam lightly. And then I'm gonna just use my canvas, and you can see that once you do that, you get a super, super tight, seamless looking, I mean, you can still see a little seam, but it's very tidy. Because we burnish that, everything is nice and crisp, and if you look at the inside, you have no stitching at all. So the next step, and our last step, is to stitch our bottom onto our pencil cup, and we'll have a finished piece. Okay, so with the glue dry, your holes, it's important to note, they're not going to line up perfectly because there's a lot more holes on the outside than there is on the inside because the stitch line is shorter on the inside because it's a smaller circle. But that's okay. We show you how to stitch holes. I'll show you how to skip holes. So what I like to do is, I like to get this pretty much lined up right where I want it, and then I flip it over, and I use my workbench to sort of stick that in and push it down so that we get a perfect right angle. And you are going to have to kind of push it a little bit. That's why I don't like to use a lot of glue, because you don't want it to stick immediately. There we go. So once I have it close, what I do, and I don't know if this is right, it's just the way that I've always done it, is I get it and I just kind of tap it on the workbench, and that usually gets me fairly even all the way around. And then I'll go around and I'll press the inside, the seam a bit, just to get that glue sticking. And you will have like a little bit there. You know, use your workbench. And now we're ready to sew. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to pick a point where it looks like the stitches are pretty much lined up, and I'm going to start from there first. So I have a stitch here and a stitch here that are basically perfectly lined up. So I'm going to start with that one, and I'm going to stick, I like to go from the top where I've done my angled stitch holes, and then kind of press down and go through. Then I'm going to get my second one started. And there's our first stitch. So we're going to want to make sure that we're pulling these tight as we go along. That's going to be very important. So we'll we'll just pull tight like that. And then we go to the next hole. So we've stitched a few stitches here, and you can see it's going well, but you can see as we get going, we have a stitch hole here with no stitch hole here. So we need to skip that stitch. The way you do that is we're gonna take our thread and we're gonna go through the new hole on one side. We're gonna go through, and this can be a little bit tricky. We're going to go through the existing hole on the other side. So now we have 2 stitches coming through the same hole. We're going to take our other thread and we're going to go out and into that new hole, like that. You don't want to pull too tight on these, and then that lines us back up for our next hole, where you can see we go right in and right through. And we're a little bit behind, but that's okay because we're going to catch up and have to do that probably every, 6 or 7 stitches. And then we're going to pull that nice and tight and just keep going along on our way. And so the same with these, as on the butt stitch. I'm just going to backstitch 2 or 3. Only this time I'm going to end my stitch on the bottom because of course it'll be sitting on a table, so you won't ever be able to see it. And here we go. So this is sort of a simple application of these stitches, but we have our nice right angle bottom and a nice cup that stands up straight, and you can see on the inside, well, hopefully you can see on the inside, no stitching because of that butt joint, and a nice right angle that's going to stay that way. And final test, nice little pen cup. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'm excited to see you guys give this a try if you haven't tried it already. Super fun. Just remember you want a diamond awl, you don't want a scratch awl for this project. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.